Lesson 7.4, Video 2. Let's take a look at some examples and how we can factor by grouping. Now we're going to start by looking at where a is not equal to 1, so we have a 7. We have a 7 and we have a 4. So we're going to multiply those together and we get 28. So we need to find two numbers that have a product of 28 and a sum of 29. So there's your product and there's the sum we're looking for. And that combination would be 28 and 1. So to group now, we will take the 7x squared, which is already there, and we're going to replace this term with a positive 28x and a positive 1x. And then we add our 4. So the 29x is replaced with two terms that add up to 29, but now we have 4 terms instead of 3, and that allows us to factor by grouping. So these two first terms we look at and say, what do they have in common? The greatest common factor is 7x. And when we take out a 7x, we get x plus 4. I'm dividing each term by 7x. Now look at the next term, the next two terms. What do they have in common? Well, they have nothing in common. So I'm just going to write very simply here a 1 on the outside, because that's nothing basically. If I multiply 1 through, I end up with the same thing. But I end up with the same thing in parentheses. And I do that on purpose because when you factor by grouping, you want to end up with the same thing in parentheses for both terms. So now I look at this whole thing and I say, what do they have in common? Well, they both have an x plus 4. And when you factor something out, you multiply what's left. And what's left is a 7x and a 1, a positive 1. And this is factored by grouping. Look at our next one. Same scenario. You take the first term and the last term, and not the variables, just the numbers, and we get 30. So we're looking for two numbers that have a product of 30 and a sum of 13. If we go through the possibilities there, we have 15 times 2. They multiply to 30, but they don't add up to 13. We've got 6 times 5. Again, don't add up to 13. 30 times 1. And 3 times 10. That's a pair that multiply and have a product of 30 and add up to 13. So we have 5x squared. And now we're going to replace the 13 with a positive 3x and a positive 10x. Again, those two terms replace the single term of 13x. And we do this so we can create 4 terms, so we can group them. The first set of terms, we have only an x in common. And we're left with a 5x plus 3 when we divide everything by 5 or by x. Our next one, if you look at that one, we have our next two terms they're both even. So I can take a 2 out, but that's it. So I have 5x plus 3. Again, now we have two terms, and hopefully if we did this right, in parentheses you'll have exactly the same thing, which allows you to say they have a 5x plus 3 in common, so I can factor it out. And it's multiplied by what's left, and what's left is the x out front and the 2. And this is factored by grouping. And this ends Lesson 7.4, Video 2.